Hello, I'm Leanna Pistel, Social Media Community Manager for the World Bank. This week we've opened up the World Bank Spring Meetings with social media and your questions. I'm here with your questions for Jane Wales, President and CEO of the World Affairs Council and the Global Philanthropy Forum. Jane, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, our first question comes from Kenya. What are the goals of the Global Philanthropy Forum and how is it structured?
The Global Philanthropy Forum aims to build a community of philanthropists and social investors from around the world, folks who are really committed to advancing international causes. So they're strategic, they want to learn from each other, they sometimes co-fund. It's all about matchmaking among them so that each becomes even more effective in his or her giving or investing.
So interesting. What's the biggest challenge that you face in your work as the head of the Global Philanthropy Forum?
Well, I think because the focus tends to be on poverty alleviation, the biggest challenge is corrupt governments and leaders. Not only do they steal from the poor, in essence, but they undermine commerce, they undermine a sense of community, they undermine trust, and in the end, those kinds of states tend to fail. So the greatest challenge for folks who are committed to sustainable economic development is corruption.
And how do you face that challenge?
Well, there are a variety of ways. I think the most important way is through the citizens themselves. And in fact, the World Bank and others have been supporting citizen groups that shine the spotlight on their governments, hold them to account in the way that traditional media has done in the past. Now that power is in the hands of individuals, brave individuals.
Do you have any examples of this to share?
Oh my
gosh!
Audience? Well, I think the most dramatic is there's an organization called Witness that was founded by the musician Peter Gabriel, and basically puts in people's hands camcorders or cell phones with cameras within them that allows them to document abuses that exist. But also, as you know, in Egypt, part of what prompted what happened in Tahrir Square was that a gentleman, or what prompted Tahrir Square was that a gentleman, a young man, had posted a YouTube video that showed officials dividing up the spoils from a drug bust. So that was a case of corruption being put on air.
Interesting. So you've worked in both the government and in the nonprofit sectors. What's the best way for organizations to work across silos?
I think the key is to do so respectfully. It's understanding what each sector brings to the table. So in the case of governments, democratic governments, that means transparency and accountability. In the case of the private sector, that means efficiency and the ability to go to scale. In the case of civil society organizations, it's agility, it's responsiveness, and then finally, in the case of philanthropy, it's the ability to take real risks and to focus on the long term. So recognizing that each of those attributes is needed to achieve a social goal, one can really value how you can take advantage of each by working across sectors.
Great. Well then, right now, what are the top 3 trends in global philanthropy? This question comes to us from Kenya.
From Kenya, that's great, because there are active philanthropists in Kenya. It's becoming more and more part of society. The top 3 trends, I'd say that the first is that foundations led by living benefactors, by those who made the wealth themselves, are now outpacing, or at least matching, the scale and the impact of those that were founded as a result of estates, like the Rockefeller Foundation or the Carnegie Corporation of New York. And these philanthropists are highly strategic, they're engaged, they're committed to results, and many of them are kind of shaped by their private sector experience, so they're willing to leverage the private sector to achieve their goals. I'd say the second big trend is that philanthropists are willing to take on very large problems like poverty, like climate change, and treat them as systems that need to be replaced with better systems. And I guess the third and final is this willingness to put their own, CEOs of corporations willing to put their companies to the service of social objectives. So it's not just grant making, it's also changing the practice of your company in order to improve outcomes for society as a whole.
Okay. From India, they ask, how can young people contribute to philanthropy?
Well, this is the first generation, this younger generation right now, that I'm not saying why aren't they more like we were? I'm saying, why weren't we more like they are? This is a generous and inventive generation that's really committed to the social good. It's striking. And so they volunteer, they give, a lot of them give online. And I think most importantly, they define their own communities very broadly because they're connected. So someone in India could see the tragedy that unfolded in Rwanda, or the earthquake in Haiti, and give far, to folks far away and activities far away. But they're also committed to their own homes. They're committed to their own countries, and they're the future. I mean, India. What an extraordinary number of young people who are starting social enterprises. They're starting little companies that provide goods and services and income generating opportunities for the poor. Pretty impressive.
That's great.
Yeah.
Jane, well, that was our last question, so thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us at World Bank Live.